I'd like to welcome everyone to our second legislative forum of the year. We're going to have a little different format today. Because of a conflict, we have two of our state elected officials that aren't here yet, but we are very lucky to have with us for the start of the program, Dennis Casey, representative for the state of Oklahoma. We'll be joined soon by Senator A.J. Griffin and by John Pfeiffer. But for an hour, Dennis and I are going to have a little conversation. He's going to tell us a little bit about how things are different right now at the Senate, where we are in the process.
Okay, you know, we have several what they call deadline weeks there at the Capitol, and that's usually when you're through. For an example, when we first started and we went through our committee work on the House with House bills, that's a deadline week. And then when the bills go back over to the Senate and the Senate bills come over to us, that's another deadline week. So this is a third of the deadline week, and so all Senate bills have been heard in committee. So what's in the till on both sides is pretty much what's in the till. So no more committee meetings. We'll spend our time on the floor in the morning and the afternoon hearing Senate bills.
And so after this week deadline comes up, what changes will there be? Will we only see bills that have already been voted out of each side?
That is correct, but you know, I could give a good example that I know that a lot of people within the community of Perry will have a good understanding was Senate Bill 1187, and the process is set up so that things can happen where bills can be amended, they can be shucked. You get a title, for an example, Education Title 70. What happened was 1187 was a very sore spot to the educators, and they didn't want the bill heard. It passed from the Senate and came over, and at the last second the person carrying the bill had decided that he wanted that bill heard, but what he did is he shucked all the language that people were upset with, and he put another educational language in there that dealt with testing. And it was actually friendly towards education. The problem is the number was already toxic, 1187. So when you hear that, it's hard to get out in front of that informational-wise to people to say, I can't believe you voted for 1187. Well, 1187 wasn't what, it was a totally different bill. And so I was very happy yesterday. We went to until about 8:30 last night on our A&B committee, and the author of that bill pulled it. And so we didn't hear that. But what can obviously happen is other bills, maybe not as high profile as 1187 was, that same thing can happen. For example, Brian, if you had a bill and it had the title on it that I needed, like a Title 47, for example, and you weren't going to use that, I could have taken that, you could have given me that bill, and I could have substituted language into there. We've kind of, it's never been popular with shell bills, and so we've moved away from having shell bills, because that's always scary, not only for the public, but for legislators also, because you don't want things to kind of sneak in, even though there's the transparency where it has to be on the calendar and everything. It's just that it's frustrating for everybody when a shell bill comes through. But what does happen during the session is something comes up that needs to be addressed. So we put a procedure in place a couple of years ago, and it's called JCAP. And what that stands for is Joint Committee Appropriations and Budget. And in order to run a JCAP bill, the Senate and the House appropriations team has to agree. And so we've got doesn't mean it's going to pass, but there's an agreement. And that's what we do with all of our appropriation bills, because they're not out there yet. They're not in the till, they're not in the hopper. And so when both sides agree, and then we run it through our AB committee, and then it goes to the floor from there. But so it's got a lot more transparency once a JCAP bill.
Obviously the big hot issue this year is the budget. We know, we've heard the 1.2 million, 1.3 million, whatever the dollar amount, billion.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
I wish it was 1.2 million.
Really. And I know you come from a very special position as being vice chair of the House Appropriation and Budget Committee. So what can you tell us, the people of Noble County and the people of Perry, about that process?
I think that depending on whether you feel like you get shut out of the process or you don't get shut out of the process, I'm fortunate that the speaker appointed me to that position, that I probably wouldn't have had the knowledge or the background to be able to speak on that without being in that position. We actually started on the budget process because we knew it was going to be pretty steep cuts and stuff even before session started. But as session start, we actually meet 2 to 3 times a week. And when I say we, it's 2 from the Senate, 2 from the House, and 1 from the governor's office. And we go back and forth. Pretty steep cuts. A lot of the members, they can get as much information as they want, but they're busy with all their things too, and so they don't always, or not always as informed that they could be or want to be just because of their daily schedules. So we meet with them and explain, and what we have to do with the budget is we have to be able to roll that out and show them with the 79 different agencies, show those cuts, okay? And those cuts are deep, and a good example, something that obviously would affect Perry too, was on the Healthcare Authority, the Medicaid aspect of it, where Nico Gomez, who's a very highly respected director there at the Capitol, has put in 25% cuts, okay? I'm glad that he did that, because there's no way we would accept that. And what I mean is that the members on the House and the Senate, the supermajority of them are not going to, there's no way they're going to shut down the nursing homes and put that on the hospitals, etc. So what we've done is we basically set up a menu, and there's a lot of money on that menu, and it will take 51 votes out of the House to drag that over there. And when you drag that over there, then that brings cuts down. Now obviously there'll be priorities. When you get into your core stuff, obviously Common Ed's a priority, public safety is a priority, roads and bridges are a priority, and so is the healthcare. Those are 4 things, and so there's a good chance it may not bring down a percentage in something that maybe not has a higher priority, but those areas right there. So when we drag that stuff from the menu, and you say, well, you know, the menu, there's some things, there's a lot of things on there I can support. It's an excellent opportunity to reform so that we're not so hooked into oil and gas, which we always will be, but we could bring that down. So it's a great opportunity. There's actually around $2 billion over there. Now, realistically, I know they're not going to bring over $2 billion. That's not going to happen. We won't get that kind of support. But there is hundreds of millions of dollars that could come over that would soften the blow on those core areas. The next 2 to 3 weeks, we're meeting in small groups. It's extremely important that members are well educated on their decisions, because I'll be the first one to tell you it's not that unusual when people are confused or don't have good information. The safest thing is to do red, which is no. All right, so we want to make sure that people that do make that decision are making a well-informed decision on what they're doing, and so that's what we're in act of doing. You'd say, well, why don't you roll that stuff out there so everybody can see it? The problem with that is, if it's not gonna be supported, there's no reason to roll it out there. At some point, you might have to roll out certain things, but it just puts it because as soon as you do that, that's going to have an effect on certain people within our state, and then the lobby really fills up, and there's a lot of lobbying going on to protect their backyard. And so when we're ready to do that, because people will come out of the woodworks, okay? And you could look at that and you could say to yourself, and you could look at it and you could say to yourself, I can support that, and I can support this, and I can support that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody else can. I bring up the point that a lot of people don't consider. Even though we're close here in District 35 to the Kansas line, we're not that close. We're probably not going to drive to Kansas to do something, okay? Where if you live around the borders, like for example, if you live on the Red River area and you're close, a lot of those constituents drive across the line because Texas doesn't have a grocery tax. And so you have to really give a lot of thought. We look at the surrounding 8 states and we look to see what they're doing that we're not doing. So there's a ton of stuff on the menu.
So when do we see a budget?
The budget is actually out, but seeing it would not do your stomach well at all because the cuts are very high. All right. The only thing that we've come out to say, and I pushed that really hard for the speaker to come out and say where they put Common Ed, and the reason, because of my background, is I was hearing from school districts that in April they were making decisions based on 10, 12, 15% cuts. And I know that wasn't going to happen. The speaker knows that's not going to happen. But if you don't share that, they have to look at worst case scenario. So basically what he said that the 5% would be worst case scenario. But I also said, well, let's be really careful that when we say 5%, we also say it's really 7. Because if you look at physical 16 when they started, it's actually a 7% cut. But that's not the way you figure the budget. But I wanted to make sure that they understood. You figure the budget is everybody got a 7% cut across the board because that's what the executive branch has to do. Okay, and then we backfilled the 51 million for public education. So their cut was already 2.44. All right. So if you say no more than 5%, you're going off the new baseline. So the schools can make a plan off of what they got originally in 16, or they can look at their new baseline and see that it's no more than a 5. I personally don't think that will be acceptable. I don't think that the majority of the House nor the majority of the Senate, from just talking to people, will accept that high of a cut. I will say the dilemma with that is when you take 51 cents out of a dollar and you hold that, one agency, especially Common Ed, which is around 33 to 34 cents, then that makes steeper cuts for everybody else. And that'll be the aspect. Like I say, I can tell you personally, there's a large percentage of the members, they have certain things that are extremely important, which we talked about, and that's Common Ed, and that's the Healthcare Authority, that is public safety, and the roads and bridges. And so there's plenty of opportunities. Now we'll find out, and a lot of people say these are going to be difficult votes. I personally don't see them as very real difficult votes because of the fact I think it gives us a chance for some true reform. So we'll see what happens from there. It'll be. I'm anxious. I'll be honest with you. Talking to my colleagues, one day I'm pretty excited about what's going on. The next day I'm kind of in the dumps, just due to the fact that you can body language tells you, oh, they're not going to be able to support this. We have members that say, what we need to do is we need to cut government. We need to cut government. And when I hear that, I'm going, we've actually done that anywhere from 10 to 40%. And so it's easy to say it's a good sound bite, but that's actually happened. And you know that as well as anybody.
Absolutely.
You could kind of explain, I'm going to throw it back at you. You could explain how that's affected you. I mean, because it affects your district also.
Well, yeah, I mean, the budget cuts that we've received, about 98% of what the DAs receive is salary. So when we get a budget cut, we're looking at cutting salary, cutting personnel. And in our office, we've lost, the district attorney's office in Oklahoma County stole one of our ADAs, and because of the potential budget cuts coming, we didn't replace that person. We all took on a heavier load and trying to deal with it, and it's short term, that's fine. Long term, it's very, very difficult.
Do you think it might work if you just announce for people to not use your office so much, not commit crimes?
Everyone stay home, don't commit crime, even though crimes happen at home too. No, obviously not. So with government becoming leaner because of these budget cuts, I would seem that there is a responsibility coming towards you all when things start getting better to avoid trying to stay lean when money comes back in with higher oil prices.
People that have heard me talk, I've said this numerous times, so I'll say it one more time. Probably, there's no doubt that in America, in the United States of America, that we have one of the best systems in the world. But there's also, obviously, flaws within the system. And one of those flaws is, honestly, at the Capitol is institutional knowledge, because the average stay is a little over 8 years, whether we have term limits or we don't have term limits. The good thing about probably having a little lengthier time than just 12 is the fact that at least there's some people still there that can say, look, we've been there, done that, and this is what happened. And so we're probably going to have, out of 101, we'll probably be pushing close to 40 new members next year. And so some of the older members that have seen things, how they've worked and stuff like that. And so the institutional knowledge a lot of times, staff, but also the people who work the lobby out there, have been out there for 20, 30, 35 years. And of course they protect their own backyards. And so there should be some lessons to be learned there, and just hopefully that gets passed on as new members come so that we don't make mistakes that another group of legislators have made.
Let me back up to the budget one more time. Are you proposing with this, with the proposal that's going to come out, is it going to be across the board cuts equally, or is it going to be based on agency?
I think a little bit of it is the way we're set up, and I'm not going to answer for that for the Senate because they do things, I would say a little more than a little bit different, okay? Because they have fewer members, with 48 versus 101, and in all fairness to my colleagues across the aisle, the Democrats, they're in the minority, and the minority is really not, they don't get all that information, all right? So they will get some information. The A and B chair will go to their caucus and talk to them, but they're not the decision making, and that's the way it was for years when the Republicans were in a minority, okay? So what we've done is we've actually gone through there and we've identified what truly is a core service versus maybe a government responsibility, and making sure that the core services take the least amount of hits, okay? The other thing is that we have what they call subcommittees, and there's a subcommittee for natural resources, education, public safety, judicial, transportation. There's like 8 of them. And those subcommittee chairs, anything that deals with appropriations comes through those subcommittees. And everybody's on a subcommittee. Every member's on a subcommittee. And then all the subcommittee chairs are on the appropriations and budget plus a few more. All right? And so if I'm the subcommittee for education, which is Scott Martin, all right, with his committee, they make suggestions and ideas. And so we meet twice. We met with them Monday, and we met with them again at 12 today. And we use them in our conversations as myself and Earl, the chair, saying, okay, what do you think? And because they're talking to all those agency people. So there's been a lot of good communication. There's a lot of good feedback. We lean on them to let us know within your area which cuts are the ones. The gentleman that I have a lot of respect for is Dr. Cox, and Dr. Cox is the subcommittee of the Department of Health. He has all that, and he has a great working relationship with those different committees, and so he has the power to make suggestions that we more times and always probably follow because of his knowledge of, they could take a hit, they can't. Maybe they could take a 14, but you got to leave them at 5.
Better stop talking bad about AJ and John. They're here now.
Oh,
so.
darn it. I warmed up you guys' seats for you, so.
Well, I want to welcome AJ and John joining us. They were at an event in Guthrie, and they scooted up the road, I'm sure, right at the speed limit to get here on a timely basis. We've been talking a little bit about the budget process and where we are with the new deadlines at the end of this week, and I've talked about that for the first little bit here. Let's talk about each of your alls. Do you all have any individual bills that you're watching right now that you think are what would be important for the people to know about? I'll start, AJ, we'll start with you and give Dennis a rest.
Well, and I carry a lot of legislation. My colleagues in the House know. I've got several pieces of some of the justice reform. There's some of the smaller pieces, and then have sent over to the House several bills around juvenile justice, and most of those are still moving along. But probably the most significant piece of legislation that I'm a part of this session is around autism and supporting our families who have children who have an autistic diagnosis, so that we can get kids on that spectrum appropriate care young, early in life, so that whenever they're school age, they're ready to succeed. And that is moving along nicely. It's been through 2 committees and is now eligible to be heard on the floor about the end of next week. Still got a couple of changes I want to see made to that, but it's moving along, and I'm very hopeful.
Great. John, what are you working on?
I had a cattle rustling bill that made it out of the House.
For it or against it?
Against it. Actually giving district attorneys more options in charging cattle rustlers. It's made it out of the House. It's made it out of the Agriculture and Appropriations Committee over in the Senate and should be hitting the floor there soon. Some other things that have come over from the Senate that I'm carrying on the House, one of them I'm really excited about. It's going to allow the Department of Environmental Quality and the Oklahoma Water Resource Board to start promulgating rules so that we can figure out a way to start recharging aquifers. As we continue to work towards our Water for 2060 plan and continue to try to drought-proof our state as much as we can, I think this is going to help us move forward. This is something that Texas has been doing a lot of in the past couple of years. Wichita, Kansas has been doing this, so hopefully we can get the rules put in place that we can start recharging these aquifers and help out some people in north central, northwestern Oklahoma as we continue to find ourselves in times like these where water gets a little tight at times.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dennis, any bills that are you just budget, or do you have?
No, actually, AJ and myself, we carried a bill for the city of Perry, and AJ did a good job of fixing it so that there was some people that were probably a little more of a misunderstanding than anything, and so she got the group together and worked it out, and so I feel like that bill will probably go to the governor's desk. I did have one that I would say I ran for our assessor, Mandy, but it was actually for all the assessors, but Mandy in her leadership role brought that, and it actually got off the Senate floor and will go to the governor's desk. That'll be the first one. But have about between Senate and House bills right at 12. Sometimes it's always tough because you obviously have to go over and get a Senate author, and then senators come to you to get that, and it's like pretty busy, but it's hard. You can't say no because they help you too. But we will say no if it's a bill that we just don't feel like that's what's best, and we do that. But AJ's always really good about helping me, and I try not to give her on my bills and try to get somebody that has that type of area. You try to match up with somebody like, for example, John. He runs some really tough agricultural bills, and so we all have our area, and so that's kind of where it goes.
Great.
Sometimes we do take bills so we can fix them.
Yes.
We'll bring that up.
Yeah,
I've been known to do that
Yeah.
as well. Because that's a way to work on a piece of legislation if you think you have an idea to make it better. And where they start and where they finish are sometimes not anywhere close to they're close. They address the same topic, but there are lots of ways to get things done.
And it takes a little bit of time. Just for an example, the bill that I got out for the city of Perry, until it got to the floor, didn't realize that there was an issue. You would have thought through committee and through other things, and so it was still a good bill, and it was able to be adjusted, and that's a perfect example of AJ fixing the bill.
Great. There's been some discussion that we need to prepare now for the next budget shortfall. And I think the example was given that North Dakota has like $2 billion or more than that in their rainy day fund. But our laws don't allow the rainy day fund to go above a certain level. Is there anything being done to try to bulletproof us for the next budget problem?
Which what we do that last year before, they raised that limit to go in, and I think that'll be taken a look at. The hardest thing, and there's a fine line there, is we're very recognizant of our citizens in the aspect that that's their money, and to have $2 billion in a rainy day, I don't know if that would even pass, because most people are very concerned about making sure we don't take any more than we need. But we obviously know that you do need to have a healthy rainy day. So there's a line there. I couldn't tell you exactly where it's at, but you can't just put the cake to cap off. I can guarantee you it would never pass.
Well, and probably as important, we're looking at the measures we're going to pass in order to shore up this year's budget, some adjustments in some tax credit programs and things. Those of us that are going to have to stick around for a while are being very aware of the fact that we don't want to just defer those expenses till a later date.
Absolutely.
And solve today's problem by creating a problem for tomorrow and the next year and the next year. And we don't want to be paying for this downturn 10 years from now. That's kind of how we got here in the first place, was making those short-term decisions, and we're all asking a lot of really hard questions.
Well, and that's one of I think the unintended consequences or downsides we're starting to see with term limits is that some of these things were put into place, and then now that our chickens are coming home to roost, so to speak, the people that put these policies in place aren't there to have to deal with it. And so when you realize, when you get on up there and you're getting closer to terming out, you possibly don't necessarily think of things as far forward as you should have or should.
Great. One issue that's, I don't know if it's a legislative issue, it's probably not, but perhaps you all have a better insight than some of us here, is what's going on with OG&E and the request of the Corporation Commission. Do you all have any insight for any of us? I know the hearings just ended yesterday morning, I believe. Any
The Corporation Commission has been hearing ongoing hearings, and what this is in regards to is OG&E is trying to become compliant with federal regulations, yet their rate structure is approved or disapproved by the Corporation Commission. This is not just OG&E wanting to make more money. This is them trying to handle undue federal responsibility and trying to figure out a happy medium where they can make the improvements they have to make by federal law without increasing power bills exponentially. And that's what the Corporation Commission is dealing with right now. Like you said, they just finished up hearings, and I haven't heard what their decision is leading to. It's got to be hard to be in the Corporation Commission and because there's 101 House members, and if Dennis and I need to talk about something and work some issues out, we can. There's only 3 Corporation Commissioners, and to follow open meeting laws, if you get more than one of them in a room to talk about something, then it's a quorum and it has to be reported. I think it would be extremely difficult to do that job where you can't talk about things and work things out. So I don't know what the ruling's going to be. I know they are still working on it, and it's an interesting case on how Oklahoma's and how their energy bills are going to be impacted by no fault of an Oklahoma company, no fault of the Corporation Commission, completely on Oklahoma or on federal regulations that we don't have any oversight over.
I know every county commissioners have to deal with that 3-person rule and,
Yes.
and the inability to talk to each other. Anyone else have any insight into any of that?
Well, I know that the commission's going to work really hard. Their job is to balance consumers' needs and the protection and the availability and of a safe, efficient, available power supply. And they have to consider both sides of that coin. I have full faith that they'll reach a reasonable decision.
We've talked about the budget a lot before you all got here. I know you all have been dealing with the budget yourselves. Any thoughts on where we are at the budget? Any way you want to throw Dennis under the bus for what he's doing?
No, I'm going to say that I'm very, very pleased with where we are. We seem to be ahead of the schedule, and I know that people don't believe when we say we're working very hard. I've had people on other media outlets and on radio say that they don't even understand. They're not even working on it. I asked it, so are you a mouse in the corner of the room? Because of the hours and hours and hours and hours of meetings we've all spent, and since way back last fall, I beg to differ on how serious we know that the problem is. And I believe that there's a general consensus of the agencies that are the priority. Core function of government is going to be protected as much as possible, and that's been agreed upon by both sides of the building. And we'll start from there, and we'll build a budget backwards and make sure that we don't hamper anybody's ability to continue to provide those basic core functions of state government.
I will say, being my second year in this, is that the House and the Senate is closer by a long ways than they were this time last year. I mean, it's been a really good working process. Last year, it just appeared to me, my first year being on it is that like the House really didn't want to show their hand, and the Senate really didn't want to show their hand, and for whatever reason, it was probably over my pay grade. But this year, it's not like that. It's been really good. Everybody's worked really hard together, and even our subcommittee chairs and from the Senate side have worked really well together, and so there is definitely a lot of work going on, I can guarantee you.
I think everybody kind of came into this session realizing that this is going to be the driving force of the session, that there is an issue, there is a problem, and we have to deal with it. We can't just keep kicking the can down the road. And thankfully, it seems, and I think Dennis and AJ are right, I think we've worked together far better. We've all realized that we're going to have to work together to get through this.
You know, there are some states, I believe, and you may correct me if I'm wrong, and some proponents in Oklahoma that said that we should change the way our House and Senate meet, and 1 year work on bills and 1 year just work on budget.
And I can tell you the pros and cons, because it is, but we can actually do that anyhow. We don't have to pass anything to do that. We could do that. I think the concern from the House is keeping in mind that we can only run 8 bills. Okay, the Senate, you know, like AJ can run an unlimited amount of bills, and so who does that swing the power to? So if we can only do 8 for 2 years, they could do 50. You know, and so which is not all bad, because quite honestly, we spend more time killing bills than we do passing bills.
Yeah.
So it's not all bad, but I think that has probably been quite a bit of the focus this year. Even though there's a lot of bills, the ones that actually get heard is the key, not how many were filed. And so I would love to see everybody be involved in the budget. They do that more so in the Senate, and we just don't have that ability in the House, just because of the sheer numbers. And there's probably a way it could get better, and I think this year, and I hope I've been a part of that process to help bring that together, is so much more communication. When you talk to the older members, they go, oh wow, man, we didn't get any information. They just rolled the budget out, and that's what we voted on. And it's totally different than it was 8 years ago. And so I think a little bit of that deals during tough times. It's going to take votes, and if you're not going to communicate with members, they're not going to vote.
Well, and that's one of the results of term limits, is I think Oklahoma will begin to see that, you know, it used to be that the legislature kind of hoarded power, and all of the power rested with just a few people, and sometimes those people were in the building for decades. With term limits and with a lot of turnover, and the fact that, you know, in order to maintain a middle-class lifestyle, you also have to have another job and do this. We're going to see diffusing power across the membership. We're going to have new young members that come in, and they get placed in positions of a lot of authority and responsibility pretty early, and you just have to do the work.
Yeah, and I think do the work's the main thing. I know one of the things that my subcommittee's done, we started meeting with the agencies that we oversee before session even started. And I think as we continue to work on, and because of a little bit of that loss of institutional knowledge, these A and B subcommittee chairs are going to have to spend some time during the interim digging into these budgets of these agencies they oversee with their committees, and getting a little bit deeper, so that we don't have so much power just resting with these agency heads that are there year after year after year and kind of wait us out. And I don't necessarily think we have to go to a budget-only session to do that. I think it's just going to require some, and several of them are very good, but just the subcommittee A and B chairs to get in there and bring their committee together and start looking at these budgets. Even if we don't have to meet in Oklahoma City, with the technology that we have, we can get these things, we can disperse them out, and we can start working on some of this stuff in the interim, so it's not all within the 4-month period we're up at the Capitol.
One of the things that's very interesting is that a few years ago, the trend was to maybe do year-round schools and spend more time in the classroom, and because of the budget cut, all of a sudden we're seeing schools cut to 4-day weeks, and perhaps people are starting to become somewhat worried about what that does to us as a business magnet, bringing businesses in when we see continuing turmoil in the schools through no fault of their own. How do we address that?
Well, the way I look at it is, not a single business operates the same way that it did in 1950, but our schools do. We do everything exactly the same way, same hours, same schedule during the week. I have recently had a couple of opportunities to interact with Sean Sheehan. Sean Sheehan is the Oklahoma State Teacher of the Year, and he is a talented young educator. And he's one of these educators that flips the classroom. They do their homework at school, and they do their schoolwork at home. And so they're using videos and technology and textbooks to study the lesson at home, and then bring their homework to school, so that their teacher then can guide them through that. there's a lot of exciting ways that we can do school. I just look for our districts all across the state to do things that are creative and different that meet the needs of their local community. And those decisions all need to reside at the local level so that they make what they have work for their families and their kids.
And to go back one a little bit, it's really always been about hours in a house. 1,080 hours is the minimum. And quite honestly, I couldn't answer for every school district, but I know one school that actually goes 15 days longer than they're required by law, if you go by hours. And so, that goes back to what AJ just said. You know, it's kind of a local type of thing, whether it's a 4-day or a 5-day, or whether it's less amount of days or something like that. I think they're best equipped to make that decision. I think all educators would probably agree that you want to be careful of not extending that time away from school too long, because of I think that would have a negative impact. But the way they teach and the way they do things is so much different. I know, for an example, you know, homework is important, but I'll be the first to tell you that if you send me home with homework and I don't understand the concept, and my parents don't understand the concept, how frustrating that is. And so by having some extended days, there is an opportunity to at least get started on the homework so that you can actually move forward. And so that's probably one of the issues. And it's frustrating for the students too. You're asking me to do something I don't understand, and I go home and rep it, only to rep it wrong. So there's some aspects there that I think, again, that's the reason that you kind of have to deal with your issues more locally, because they best know what the problems are, not us.
Okay, great. What do you want to see done with the rest of the session?
Yeah, obviously, it's the budget. We want to make sure that on the House side that all of our members are as well informed of the options that are out there, answer all the questions, get them actively involved in the decisions they're going to have to make on the floor at some point in time. We talked earlier that some people will say, man, there's going to be some really tough votes. I personally don't see them as tough votes, but I can see where somebody else is, because we all have a different constituent base of what they expect and why they sent you down there. And so that's what I look forward to. And there's still some bills out there that are very important, and some bills that are quite interesting. For an example, we voted one just the other night in A and B was the federal ID bill. You know, there's some people that don't want that to pass. The bill itself, I get a little confused because of the fact that the way the bill is written is that you don't have to get the new driver's license. It's totally up to you. If you do, it's going to make a difference at some point in time, whether it's an 18 or 17, on whether you can board the plane without maybe taking a whole lot more time. And so if you don't travel by airplane, you can keep your old license. But if you do, then you're probably going to have to consider getting the federal ID. And so there's a lot of people upset about that bill. They don't want that intrusion of the federal government. I just don't want my constituents to come back to me and say, you guys didn't do anything, and now I have to have a passport. And that's $140 or something, and it's a whole lot more difficult to get a passport than it is to go get the federal ID. So that got out of committee, and we'll see what is on floor. Obviously, it came through the Senate. So those are, you know, that's an important bill, because it's going to have an impact. Not that I'm a frequent flyer, but every once in a while I have gotten on an airplane. I sure don't want to. I already get there an hour early. I sure don't want to get there a couple days early.
You know, and that's something that we're going to have to deal with. Nobody likes the federal government telling the state of Oklahoma what to do, but they've put their foot down on this issue, and we've tried to make it as compromising as we can of those who don't want to get a real ID, as they're called, and they don't have to if they don't want to. But those Oklahomans that have to travel for their jobs and things like that have to have that option. I think that's something that we need to get done as a state, simply to allow our citizens to get on airplanes, access to federal buildings, things like that. And it's something we have to get done, and obviously the budget, whatever it may be.
Well, at the end of the day, when we adjourn sine die in May for the last time, and we'll have several colleagues that will adjourn for the very last time as they reach the end of their term limits. And many of these leaders in the Senate and the House as well, we'll bid them farewell. But I hope we've made a lot of decisions that make life better for average Oklahomans. And exceptional Oklahomans as well, although all Oklahomans are exceptional. And I hope we haven't made decisions that make life harder the next year. Nobody's going to be thrilled with our budget because government has an insatiable appetite for other people's money and always will and always has. So no one's going to be thrilled, but at the end of the day, I hope we'll be able to pay our bills and we'll be able to continue to pay the hardworking state employees that work for all of us and keep this place clicking.
You know, one of the things I've heard from Dennis today and from all of you is that this one big change this year with the budget is, at least perception-wise, there always was, the budget was kind of thrown down our throat at the last second, and this year there's going to be actual discussion and selection made by both chambers to decide how the budget will look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, and there's one aspect that I know when you go vote in November, there's a chance that people are going to be a little bit shocked. I jokingly say you better take a sack lunch because there's probably going to be several ballot issues. And there's a reason for that, and it's some people may say, I wish the legislators would do their job instead of running all these ballots. But the problem is, and I don't remember the years in the 90s when we passed the thing where it takes 3/4 of the vote to do any type of what I would call reform. Other people might call it adding revenue. So when it happens, you can send it to the ballot with 51 votes, and I'm referring to the House. I don't know what your 3/4 is, but it would be very difficult to get 76 votes. If it got 76, then it wouldn't have to go to a ballot. And so I do see being numerous, probably more than ever, ballot initiatives.
And some, again, I'm going to take a little jaundiced view here and apologize for that. Some would say that some of those ballot issues are because people are, legislators are afraid to take a position on an issue and pass that off to the people rather than doing what they're voted to do.
You know what? I won't disagree with that, but that's what we have. That in essence, that's what we have. Keeping in mind that with the districts that we serve, especially me, I won't answer for them. Is District 35 is more similar than dissimilar, but we do have members that have districts that, gosh. Every vote they make a large percentage of the people upset because they're not as similar. So from that aspect, keeping in mind that we'll say just John Doe that lives in an urban area where he can actually walk his district in one day, where there's no way that we could do that. Who sent him down here? It might be an extremely conservative district, and they do not want, no matter what, they don't want to see any type of changes or revenue. Take the money that you got, make the best of what you have, and so I respect that, and that's the reason that 3/4 votes is extremely hard to reach.
Well, and besides the revenue measures, we're going to see just countless other things on the ballot as well, which is what's going to make this ballot so long that you got to sit there and eat lunch while you're doing it. When Oklahoma became a state, we passed the longest state constitution ever in history, and we've put so many things into our constitution that to change things or update things, whether it's anything dealing with the Able Commission, trying to add in a constitutional amendment to protect farmers and ranchers, repealing the Blaine Amendment, any of these things we want to do, because they were so specific when they drafted our state constitution, that requires a vote of the people. So on top of the ballot measures for revenue that we could possibly also see, we're going to see just a whole lot of other things because our constitution is so specific in what it covers. So it could easily be a 2-page ballot this year, I think.
Well, it's a checks and balances issue. I mean, we can't raise your taxes without a lot of work. It's probably not going to happen.
Not gonna happen.
We can't raise taxes, and we can't change the Constitution. It's part of the checks and balances of our system. Those powers lie with the people.
What is that, SJR, is it 60, which?
SJR 68.
Yeah, and that's a good example is, because I do receive emails on that, and there's some concerns.
Why don't you tell people what that is?
Okay, that deals with, basically, I don't know if the exact wording, updating our liquor laws, would that be a fair
The
statement?
continued repeal of prohibition that's been
Okay.
going on
Yeah,
since
yeah, it depends
1930.
on where you're at there, but what that does is it doesn't actually put anything in law as far as you can get 6-point beer, cold wine at the store. What it does is it allows the people to decide whether they want to lighten that from a constitutional aspect to a more of a statutory aspect, and then that would allow the legislators to vote on a bill, because right now you could run a bill out there, but it doesn't matter because it'd be unconstitutional. So that's really what that ballot's going to be about, if that makes sense. Probably makes more sense to you.
It does, except that, is it not part of that that's going to allow grocery stores and convenience
No,
stores?
that would take a bill.
That's a bill in addition.
Yeah,
That's
that's a
right.
bill.
That's right.
And so that's the one thing else, because I have people saying, please support, but I also have businesses that are in that area that are very concerned because it could drive them out of business. But that bill doesn't actually do that, but they got a case to say if it passes, it could have an effect, because then you all will change statute.
And there's some huge battle lines that have been drawn on that. I know Terry White in mental health has really taken a strong position. I'm opposed to it. And I know that the DAs have kind of stood on the side and said, as long as you fund the cost of law enforcement and mental health and prosecution, because we're going to have more DUIs if you sell strong beer in a liquor store and it's more available and it's longer hours and things like that, we're going to see some of those things. As long as you've taken into account those type of things, then the people obviously can get whatever they want.
It's interesting because of, we obviously receive our share of emails, and on that one, I would say it's probably every bit of 20 to 1 that they're asking to support that.
Yeah, the Oklahoma, all we're trying to do is, by putting this SJR on the ballot, is letting the people decide. And if the people of Oklahoma want this, then we can continue to move forward with this process. And if they don't, then they'll vote it down. We can step back and keep what we have. But yeah, when they ended prohibition at the United States Constitution level, Oklahoma didn't really like that, and we put laws in place and constitutional amendments in place to try to keep prohibition as long as we can. And it's time for us, at least in my opinion and a lot of the political scene, to let the people decide whether or not we want to continue to move forward and join the rest of the states that have upgraded their systems.
There's still some counties with liquor by the drink, aren't there? I think there's there one or two.
That don't have liquor.
Grant
They
County
don't.
just passed liquor by the drink in 2014.
God love it.
Logan County just passed sales on Sunday a few weeks ago.
It changes slowly but surely. That's one thing you can count on, this change all the time. We're getting close to our time. Is there anything you'd all like to add before we call this a day?
Oh gosh, it's going to be an interesting month. Honestly, I look forward to it, not because of the end. It's just that I'm cautiously optimistic that a lot of the people's concerns will be answered. I mean, because there's people that this is tough. I mean, it's a hard situation. I mean, you're a perfect example of how it's affecting how you do business. And so my hopes that towards the end there, that you're going, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And that's what I hope, that we're all able to have that conversation when this session's over. I hope that's exactly what we say, because we're never probably going to hit perfect.
We're gonna do whatever we need to do to comply with the laws of the state of Oklahoma.
And I think as we move forward and get closer to a budget process, like the senator mentioned earlier, I hope we don't just keep kicking these cans down the road for future legislators to have to deal with. I hope we deal with some of these problems now and start fixing things for more long-term solutions, and I think we will. And keep reminding people in Oklahoma, we've went through our oil downturns before. We've made it before. It's rough, but we can do it, and we'll do it again this year. And not everybody's going to be happy with the budget, but we will come up. I have every confidence that we'll come up with the best budget we can and make some reforms that we need to along the way.
Great.
And we're getting better. I mean, stress makes you better. It's just like, Coach over here knows. When he wanted those boys to get better, you put them under a lot of stress in practice so that they were able to perform, and I think we're seeing that. The other thing that I think is encouraging is we're starting to really see some real leadership emerging among the members. That's based on who is willing to do the work and who's willing to get in there, roll up their sleeves, make hard decisions, and ask lots and lots of questions. And we've exposed a lot of things that without this, I hate to use the word crisis, but without this stress, we wouldn't have known before. So it's going to make us make better decisions moving forward. And I know I'm ridiculously optimistic, and I always tell people, if you want someone to rant and rave and say the sky is falling, I'm not your girl. Not at all. But it is, it's a great time to be in Oklahoma.
Senator, thank you. Representatives, thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure being here again. I want to remind everyone that this is Child Abuse Prevention Awareness Month, and so be aware and keep your eyes out for kids that are in need. And there'll be events going on throughout the month. And on next week, Thursday, on April 14th, there'll be a program at the courthouse beginning at 11:30 dealing with victims' rights, and a movie being shown and a free lunch. So I'd encourage everyone to show up for that. Again, we'll be back the first Thursday of the month of May. So we ask you to come back at 3 o'clock, and we'll do this again and have a better idea where this legislative session is headed. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.